It's foster care story time, and today I'm going to tell you the story of how foster care absolutely saved a child's life, then ruined it, and then brought him back. Let's go, Dad. So today I'm going to tell you about a boy named Caden. Caden's not his real name, but we're going with it. So Caden was in this terrible situation with his birth mom. She was addicted to drugs. She lived in a crack house, and she just didn't have it all together. And so Caden would go looking for meals, but only he wouldn't get a nice, hot, warm meal like some kids get. He would go digging in a dumpster. And he'd only go out there when he felt it was safe. So mom didn't have any creepy boyfriends over. There weren't creepy people walking through that inner city area where he lived. But he'd go out and he'd find it. And finally someone saw him when he was just this little boy, and they reported him in. He came into foster care. Now Caden was a lucky kid. He got put with an amazing family. They truly were a sweet group of people. They loved this kid. They were one of those families that never watches TV, but they have lots of stuff for kids to do. Caden was living it up, right? So Caden lived with these people for a while in hopes that he would someday be adopted by them. Now, of course, the first goal is always to take kids back to their homes, and everyone worked really hard, including the foster family, to get him back to his home, but mom just wasn't getting off drugs, wasn't cutting it. They needed permanency for Caden to be healthy and well, and so instead of going home, they were going to adopt. The problem was, suddenly the dad of this family got a job out of state, not just like one state over, but all the way on the other side of the country, and the caseworker said no. He cannot go. You got to stay here until he's adopted and you can go. But dad didn't have a job. Dad needed to move. It was this awful situation. Now, first, I want to tell you about how Caden was when he came into the system. And Caden was this kid. His hair was super long and it was like greasy. Like nobody wanted to touch this kid's hair because it was that gross. And there's this rule in the foster care system that if there's still a biological parent whose rights have not been terminated so that someone else isn't on the way to adopt this kid, that you can't cut the kid's hair. And so he had this crazy long hair. Now, obviously they cleaned it, but he had this crazy long hair and he hated it and he wanted it gone. But mom said no. So he had to keep that crazy long hair. Everyone made fun of him, called him a girl. But ultimately, Caden didn't even care that much because Caden was cared for. He was loved. He was in a good home. So I met Caden through his social worker. And it was really interesting. I was actually set up to do babysitting when I was a teenager for foster kids while their parents were meeting with social workers or while parents were in training. So that was part of my gig back in that time. And I met Caden at this time, and he was just a nice, good kid. Like, he's one of those kids that you're just surprised that he had come from the system and that he had been through everything he had been through. He was a good kid. He was a little quiet, but he listened, and he always paid attention. He was one of those kids that I think wanted to please, which can be a bad thing, but I don't think he took it too far. He just wanted to do right by the people who were helping him out. It was hard not to like Caden. Now, the problem of having a kid with a family, I think Caden had been with his family for like 3 or 4 years. The problem is that family had formed such a deep bond with Caden that they were his family. He would have been okay going home with mom, but anything other than that had to be this foster family. The problem was when they moved, this caseworker came in and said, I'm sorry, I'm not gonna let him move across the country. He's gotta be in a foster home here because there's still a chance that Caden could go back with mom, and mom still has to have visits. And back then we didn't have like Zoom and all these things we have now for visits. So Caden had to stay. She was doing her best to follow the court orders. Caden had to stay to have visits, to be able to have contact with mom, even though they were already talking about terminating mom's rights and saying goodbye to mom permanently, which they did end up doing, okay? They actually did that fairly soon after this family moved, and the family did move away. So the next 5 years of Caden's life were awful. Caden stole cars, Caden broke windows, Caden was destructive and mean. He still didn't talk much. He held it all inside, and it came out. He started failing classes. He almost got kicked out of school a couple times. I think some other social workers came in and really advocated for him, so that didn't happen. But Caden just became a mean kid. It all broiled up inside of him. He was angry, and he wanted the world to pay. Now, during this time, Caden really didn't have contact with that family that had wanted to adopt him. They didn't have contact with them at all. They had tried to sever ties, and I don't mean the family, I mean the caseworker had tried to sever ties, feeling like Caden needed a fresh start with a new family if he was going to heal and get through this. But guess what? After 5 years, Caden still had not healed. He still was misbehaving. He still was doing stuff. He stole a car. He broke windows. He ran away from home. All of these different things. Caden was still having a rough time. Now, I had met Caden again around this time, probably when he was about 15, 16 years old, somewhere around then, and I didn't recognize him. So Caden had been allowed to cut his hair, so he had short hair. That's the one thing. But the other thing is there's this darkness about Caden. Like whatever had happened to him had truly affected him, had truly damaged him, and you could feel that walking into the room with him. Maybe it was this anger that just poured out of him and flowed through him, and you felt that when you walked into the room with Caden. I felt bad because I knew a little bit about this kid's story. I felt really bad as I walked into the room with Caden. How had this happened? This foster care system was supposed to bring Caden into a good place, to protect him, and instead what it did is it put him with a family that he fell in love with, that was his family. Even at like 15, 16, when he had been separated, he still called the parents mom and dad. And so instead of just losing mom, Caden lost mom and dad. Foster care hurts. And now there's no perfect system, and I don't know what the answers are. Again, this caseworker was trying to solve a problem. This caseworker was trying to follow the court orders, which meant having visits with mom. And I mean, that's a good thing, right? Having visits with mom. I mean, she's on drugs, but she can't get him back. But I truly can't imagine being a parent and having a kid taken away from me. And then, can you imagine what it would be like to be a parent, have that kid taken away from you, and then told you can't have visits anymore? That he's moving across the country. You'll probably never see your child ever again. Ouch, that hurts, man. That hurts. So I don't know what the right answer is, but I'll tell you what happened to Caden. So at this point, another social worker comes in. So the way this works in a lot of cases is there's two social workers. One's like the county worker and one's a private agency worker. And the private agency worker came in, right? And she got really close to Caden, and she cared about Caden. And the county worker saw this and finally came up to that private agency worker, and they said, I feel like somewhere inside this kid is a good kid, but I don't know what to do for him. Now, mind you, this is a different caseworker. Caseworkers tend to change a lot. This was not the same caseworker who had ordered him to be moved to another state. She said, I don't know what to do with Caden. What does he need? What does he need? So then the private agency caseworker said to her, he needs his family. That's where he belongs. He needs to be with his family. Back to his mom? But she's on drugs. We've tried. She just will not go through the process of healing. She will not go through rehab and all the things you have to do to get past this drug addiction. He needs his family. The family he lived with, the family that fostered him and planned to adopt him, the ones that he called mom and dad. That's who he needs. This time the caseworker listened. This time the caseworker said, let's call him up. Let's see what happens. I would love to tell you that Caden was cured and everything was great and that Caden lived happily ever after. The truth is, Caden had a long journey ahead of him. He had to heal. He had to learn to trust again. Yes, he was placed with that family. They struggled with him. They gave him boundaries. They called him out when he crossed those boundaries. They had to show him love. But sometimes it's a little harder learning how to love a teenage boy who's been involved in all this bad stuff, right? It's a little harder. You have to learn a different way of doing things. But you know what? They took the time. And with teenagers, we always say you have to earn the right to be heard. They earned that right with Caden. He heard them. He heard them with his heart. He heard them with his ears. And Caden turned it around. I'm not saying everything was great immediately with Caden. Doesn't happen. He had a lot. I mean, that's a lot to go through. He had a lot. Everything was not better immediately with Caden. You know, Caden got older. Caden lived in their community. He decided not to move away, not to run away, not to move away. He lived near mom and dad. Caden did like an apprenticeship. What is it called? An apprenticeship? Journeymanship? I don't know, whatever it is. But Caden did that in mechanics. He learned how to be a car mechanic. And in that town, he is their car mechanic now. He's grown into that role. You know, he went from learning from someone who poured into him to being this man who everyone takes their cars to and trusts. And every car, honestly, is like his baby in that town. And Caden has come so very far. And he's loved not just by his family, but by this whole community that's embraced him. And Caden, whether he's really living happily ever after, he is living happily ever after. Thanks for watching Foster Care Storytime, and let's go dad. Now Caden, long greasy hair or short hair, he's not one person. It's not just that the name has been changed for this story. This actually represents about 5 different stories of kids who all have so many similarities, but their stories were pieced together to bring this to you. I ran it by someone who'd been a caseworker, and she was also saying, oh my gosh, I know like 3 or 4 of those kids just like that. She's like, started naming these kids off, going, that's their story, that's their story. Didn't end quite the same way, this didn't happen quite the same way, but that's their story. It's amazing to me how many kids have lived through this. If you like this, check out these other videos somewhere over in this area. Let's go, Dad. I could totally pull this off, right?